Hello and welcome to the show where we discuss the Indian economy, the crisis it is in, and the way forward. The Prime Minister had asked the nation to be Atmanirbhar. He not only wants to produce India's produce in India, he also wants to produce the world's requirements in the country. But for that we need the manufacturing sector, industries, infrastructure, and all of these involve a lion's share of migrant laborers, and we have sent them back home. Now what do we do? How do we get them back? Do we incentivize their return? We thought, why not talk to young economists across India and find out what they think about this crisis and the way ahead.
They have just been reaching in these 15 days to the places that they were supposed to reach when the lockdown started. So the government also has to assume that in the next month at least, not all migrant laborers, especially after the hardship that they have faced, will also be willing to come back. So, I mean, in a state wherein there's also the entire notion of labor laws being suspended, I don't think the laborers would feel comfortable also coming. So this is not the time to disincentivize laborers. Now is the time to incentivize them by promising them things that were missing from now on. I mean, you can always assume that you will have social distancing in factories, but you also know that social distancing is not possible in areas where these migrant laborers live. I mean, they live in rooms with 12 people together. So all of these also have to be looked upon before you start thinking about things of bringing them back and reviving the economy, because COVID is still a problem. It's not gone anywhere. So you need to have a broader outlook and not just think in neoliberal terms. You just bring the laborers and start the factories. A lot more things on the practical level have to be worked out.
We have also heard the migrant laborers and also some experts say that people might have lost a little bit of trust because they were not properly tended to when they needed that help. Nilanjan, what do you think the government should do, or what should be the next step to start off the factories? Like Vrinda said, we also need to take into account that where they live, it's very difficult to maintain social distancing and also maybe give them that support at times. What do you think the government should do at this point?
I slightly differ on what she said. I don't think there is going to be any problem in terms of the migrants joining again, because most of the migrants, they are now in their respective states, and most of them are in rural areas, as you know. And an alternative to this is many are saying that they can be engaged in NREGA works and all. But you must keep in mind that NREGA wage is very less. That is currently recently the government has increased that to 202 rupees. But the same migrant, had he worked in some cities, he would have earned 500 rupees or 600 rupees a day. So because now he doesn't have that opportunity, maybe he's compelled to work in those NREGA or something like rural guarantee scheme. But I don't think it will be an issue once I think we all are waiting for this lockdown period to be over. So once that is over, I don't think it will be a problem for the government to bring back the migrants. They will be willing to join, since there is a huge gap, huge wage difference between the rural wage and the urban wage.
So you're saying that even though we've started the Narega and we've hiked up the wages a bit, it doesn't really matter because people are going to come back to the urban areas because it pays them more, right?
Recently, I read a report. So in Bengal, Bengal has a huge amount of migrant laborers. So in Bengal, the government offered job card to the migrant laborers, but a very negligible amount have actually registered. So they are still hoping that they would be able to go back and again join their respective works in the cities. Because as I said, the wage here is only 200 or something like that. Whereas if they go to the cities, if they do what they were doing before lockdown, there's a huge wage difference. So I don't think that is a problem.
Then what do you think is the issue now?
Immediately, what the government should do to give some relief is to transfer, I would say, the direct benefit transfer to the migrants. Because this same government, when came into power, they advocated this jam trinity to a great extent. So now this is the time to prove that it was indeed needed. So now if you don't use this technology, then what is the need? So I think immediately the government should give them some security benefit, some kind of cash transfer till the lockdown period is over, and before they are able to join their work again.
Okay. Soham, what do you think about the NREGA coming back into focus? It has come back into focus recently, and the government has given 4,000 crores more after what has been allocated in the budget, and it now has a little bit more than 1 lakh crore for the scheme. Is this enough to revive the rural economy as drastically it needs to be?
The focus has come back now, but the need was always there. I mean, throughout the period, the need to create gainful rural employment was always there. And particularly in the period between March to May, that's a lean season largely for most of the India, which is dependent on rain-fed agriculture. Wherever irrigation practices are prevalent, you'll find there are the rabi crops are being cultivated, including West Bengal and some bits and parts of Punjab and Haryana. So in lean season, MGNREGA was providing, I mean, for a long period of time, it was providing gainful employment for a large amount of rural population. And now it becomes more important because as both, I mean, connecting to both Vrinda's and Nilanjan's point, it is true that the economy to regain and restart on a normalcy mode, it will take time. And NREGA thereby remains as an important source of employment, not only for the migrant workers who have gone back, but it is also some kind of a cushioning for the largely for the rural women workers who otherwise stay out of gainful employment in rural India, and that has been documented since 2004 onwards, and more so in the recent period. So that has remained, and thereby I would rather say that the allocation itself, to what extent that caters to the rural employment, that only time can say. But why aren't the government? Why isn't that the government pushing for NREGA kind of a employment security for the urban poor? Till the time it is not, the economy is not in normal phase, I think NREGA like employment guarantees should be provided to the urban poor by whatever categorization it is possible, and that provides us provide the workers with more livelihood opportunities in recent times. And just to add, I mean, that what Nilanjan is saying, that NREGA wages are pretty low, which means there is a lack of wage legislation also in NREGA. I mean, a minimum wage that sustains the basic livelihood and the lives dependent on it should also be taken care into account when we talk about MGNREGA. It's not just about the allocated amount, it's also about how many it is going to cater.
And since you spoke about the urban employment generation scheme and what possibly could be done, one problem that might arise is that the urban setup of governance is a bit more complicated than the panchayat system. You have municipalities, you have development agencies, you have a lot of complicated setup. Do you think it is possible to start off an urban employment generation scheme right now, or would it take some time? Siddharth, I would like to ask you this. What do you feel about an urban employment generation scheme? Would it work?
An urban employment scheme would certainly, as you said, there are governance-related issues involved there. It might take longer than we would like it to. And so the immediate need of the hour, as someone has already pointed out, would be cash handouts to these people, because they have to pay their rent, they have to pay electricity, host of other stuff. So right now, I would say the need of the hour would be cash handouts to these poor, and then to sort of legislate some sort of urban employment.
We have seen labor law changes across various states. It's not just the BJP states. We have MP and Rajasthan also, who have to incentivize the economic activity. They've changed the labor laws, right? And these we have around 200 state laws and almost 50 central laws, but we don't have a very streamlined process in that, and they have been inflexible at times. Do you think the labor law changes were a need of the hour, or do you think it is as detrimental as the critics make out to be?
So, labor laws, I think, have to be viewed not in the light of attracting investment anymore. They have to be viewed in the light of welfare. Welfare of the poor, welfare of the migrant labor. So we already failed them by requiring them by failing to provide them either relief or reassurance, and so that they had to trudge back home thousands of miles. Suspension of labor laws comes on the back of already having failed the migrant labor. So it's a failure there. And suspension of labor laws also, to my mind, is a low road to growth, right? The high road to growth would be building productivity, improving productivity, which would happen through skill development, education, availability of basic healthcare.
That also takes time. It's a long drawn process.
But suspension of labor laws, as I've said, is sort of an extension of the failure of the government in providing relief to the poor, the hardest hit by this lockdown. So it is one of the least favorable way. It is one of the least. I think it is one of the most frowned upon ways that you could take to revive investment, to revive the economy.
Right. Mukund, I would like to ask you this: that, like Siddharth pointed out, this might have been the wrong time to do it. But do you think this would have been a good idea at some other point, or this is a bad idea in general, no matter what time you do it?
Discuss it with the parties involved. First of all, they have been doing these things on their own. They don't discuss it with the parties affected. They never discuss it with the labor unions or the laborers affected. They should take a democratic rule rather than being authoritarian. So I don't think this is a good way to do it. There might have been a good time to do it afterwards.
So just adding to what the two of them said, I mean, when you look at what the idea behind the UP government's take on suspending the labor laws were threefold. First, they said that, of course, it's COVID relief and you want migrants to work. But the two other things that they said was that they want to bring in investment and that they want to compete with China. I think a thing like competing with China is not what you should be focusing on right now, at least. But things like investment, I mean, you have to look at more things and actually find out what is affecting investment in a state like Uttar Pradesh. I mean, when you look at the ease of doing business report, it clearly states that there are other indicators which are being lacking in India. I mean, things like resolution of insolvency, registering property, these are things in which India ranks really, really low. And labor laws, and even when you see, I mean, states like Madhya Pradesh, the kind of labor laws that they have gone away with are resolution acts, right? How the resolution will happen between the laborers and the employers. I mean, these things do not impact investment at the ground because there are larger pictures on which investment has been investment has been stagnated for a very long time. So it's a very easy economic way to say that you reduce labor laws and investment will come, but the governments are not focusing on the larger picture on which they had not had investment for a very long time, and these issues will not magically disappear. They will still remain, and I think it's also important to focus on them.
So just to add what she said, I think the reason behind changing the labor laws that these states are giving is that it will boost investment, and then again it will be beneficial for the economic growth. But I think two things we are missing out. I think we haven't highlighted that all these three states, that is Uttar Pradesh, Gujarat, and Madhya Pradesh, they have increased the working hours from 8 to 12. Okay, and I have checked that none of these states they have made this overtime mandatory. So even the employer can get away without paying the overtime. Okay, and one more thing, they are saying that so the bone of contention for a long time had been this IDA, Industrial Dispute Act, which says that in order to retrench workers, you need to take permission of the government if the employment is more than 100. So they are saying that this hinders the expansion of the firms, and as a result, there is a trend towards contractualization or informal labor supply in the economy. So this is their reasoning. But when we see what they have done, this is exactly opposite. So their point is that this will create more employment. So instead of increasing the labor hours to 12 from 8 to 12, we could have done 2 8-hour shifts that would create more employment rather than increasing this to 12 hours. And also, what I have a fear that this might also result in a decrease in wages. Why am I saying this? Because now most of these states, they do not have to comply with most of the labor laws. So there is no, for example, there is no one stopping them from stopping an employer from firing the workers. So I'm talking about an extreme situation. So firing the workers and then rehiring them again at a lower wage. This might also happen. So there is no rule or law that prevents them from doing so. So then there is a chance that wages might fall also. And obviously, if the employer has this liberty to do whatever he wants in terms of employment, so why would he go for why would he go for formalization of labor force? Because it would add up to his cost. social security benefits. So I don't think this is a good move.
I would like to start with Soham. Do you think that there's a legislation change that we need along with these policy changes that we have brought forward in the recent economic package? Is there a need of a legislation change as well?
I'll just give an illustrative example. Say, for example, like you infuse liquidity, you create a space for the MSME or other industries to invest at this hour. The investment comes, production starts. What binds those MSME and other organized manufacturing sectors to re-employ the contractual or informal workers, those who are working at the, there is no guarantee to the workers to get back their whatever gainful employment they will. That's the first thing. Second, there are many legislations that, like as Nilanjan, Vrinda, Siddharth, all of them are pointing out that the labor law regulations are coming at the time in the name of ease of doing itself business is stalled. That you're saying that might this bring in investment. What necessitates these industries to provide social security to the workers they're employing? And more importantly, coming out of lockdown means for any economic activity to take place, the COVID risk remains. It is not only a risk of livelihoods, it's also a risk of lives. So what binds the employer to provide care and safety to the workers at this particular point of time when even the economy restarts? So given all of these issues like economic security as well as life, the security of, nothing binds the employer to provide safety and security to the worker. Neither does it bind the policy implementing authorities as well. Like there's no binding principle to that. And I mean, we lack in providing any sort of economic dignity to the large section of informal and migrant workers who were rather providing their whose labor it was which was providing the economy a really growing amount or rather sustaining growth. And now that we see the fissures have come out, and it has.
Yes. Vrinda, do you think that we need this change in legislation as well as the policy changes now? Is this a good time to do it?
I think if not now, then when? This is the need of the hour, and this is almost one of the worst situations India has been in a very long time. I mean, COVID has affected almost all the countries in the world, but the kind of crisis, especially in terms of migrant laborers that we're seeing in this country, is unprecedented. So these legislatures are extremely important, especially when there's a belief within the laborers that the government has not done enough for them. I mean, of course, there are new legislations required, but also existing policies need to be, revamped right now. I mean, when you look at Jan Dhan Yojana, this was the time it was supposed to work. But now we are seeing the problems with Jan Dhan Yojana as well. We see double accounts, or we see accounts that are defunct. We see the registration that was promised to us by the government actually not being there. So it's also time to look at the policies that were designed to help people and revamp them right now, so that as soon as possible, these cash transfers, which we have talked about, can actually go to people. I mean, it's good in principle, but until and then the practicality is solved, we can't really think about this happening at all.
If you want to be part of the discussion, you can reach out to us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. Subscribe to our channel to listen to the most sensible voices from colleges and universities across the country.